Statements by ministers. Ministry of Community and Social Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm proud to rise today to mark the 100th anniversary of the Ontario Soldiers' Aid Commission. And joining us in the legislature today in both members' galleries are the Commission Chair, Colin R. Rowe, Vice Chair John Stapleton, and Commissioners Homer R. Brooks, Alfred H. L. Harris, and William Earl Thomas. And I'm also pleased to welcome two commissioners who have been newly appointed to the Commission, Rosemary Maguire and my constituent Susan Bahario. On November 10th, 1915, a group of dedicated Ontarians with the support of the provincial government came together to meet a growing need. Thousands of soldiers were returning home from the front lines of the First World War, and they were returning with physical and psychological injuries, and there were not sufficient support services to help them. Many did not return, and their families were coping with the devastation of war with little or no support. The Ontario Soldiers' Aid Commission came into being with its first offices here in the Legislative Building. In the ensuing years, the work of the Commission expanded to meet the growing needs of soldiers and their families. By 1916, 37 Commission branches were operating in communities throughout Ontario, assisting soldiers by finding work and housing for returning soldiers, arranging training, advocating for fair wages and pensions, reaching out to soldiers' families who needed help, and in 1920 being given all the powers of a Children's Aid Society to serve as the ward for hundreds of Ontario children whose families were impacted by the war. In fact, the Soldiers' Aid Commission was one of the first examples of social services in Ontario. It preceded the formation of Veterans Affairs by 29 years. Later, as Canadians fought in the Second World War and the Korean War, the Commission again rose to meet the needs of Ontario's returning soldiers and families left behind. Wow. Mr. Speaker, on Remembrance Day, we as a society stopped to reflect on the sacrifices of our veterans. The Soldiers' Aid Commission thinks of those sacrifices every day and continues to provide assistance to Ontario's veterans and their families.
Hear, hear.
To help celebrate this milestone anniversary later today, Commissioners will join the Lieutenant Governor, the Honourable Elizabeth Dowdeswell, for a formal reception in the Lieutenant Governor's suite. To share their important history with Ontarians, the Commission has produced a commemorative book entitled Ontario's Soldiers' Aid Commission, 100 Years of Assistance to Veterans in Need, 1915 to 2015. It chronicles the Commission's century of groundbreaking support and advocacy on behalf of veterans. They fought successfully for services to help veterans return to the workforce and pensions for veterans and their families. Mr. Speaker, next week, when we pause on Remembrance Day to recall the sacrifices made by Canada's courageous women and men, I invite all honourable members to also recognise the enormous contributions that the Soldiers' Aid Commission has made to the lives of Ontario veterans and their families over the past 100 years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.